This is an essay in the series After the Walls Come Down, Building New Institutions from the Remains of a Broken World by William Young.
School environments are structured to certify people. Large universities keep records for tens of thousands of students each year. Some large urban school districts keep records for hundreds of thousands. While students are accumulating the credits and grades needed for graduation, school administrators are recording everything lest a student do something that is not officially certified. Keeping records about degrees, requirements, course units, and grades costs enormous amounts of money, and these things are completely extraneous to the learning process. Whenever the idea of eliminating certification requirements from schools is proposed, people immediately ask, how would you know if people are competent? Would you want to be operated on by a doctor who does not know medicine? Of course, I want doctors and every other person with whom I deal to be competent, but having a diploma does not prove competence. All professionals should have to pass rigorous tests to prove competence, but it should not matter whether the person acquired the necessary skills and knowledge in a classroom, a library, in the field, or at home. The only important consideration is that the person has the requisite skills and knowledge. The more people who acquire credentials at any levels of the school system, the less valuable the credentials become in the job market. As the average years of educational attainment increased during the 20th century, diploma requirements for many types of jobs increased as well. Possessing a diploma does not facilitate social mobility as much as not possessing one hinders mobility, and schools control who moves. Under the current system, many people are driven to obtain unnecessary school credentials and forced to pay tuition for many required courses in which they have little or no interest. Obtaining the credentials is necessary if they want to improve their chances for future success in the job market. Creating an education system that promotes freedom for learners will entail that schooling and certification be delinked, and that discrimination by employers on the basis of educational attainment be prohibited. People are pressured to stay in school, and life can be hard on those who drop out. Unless the dropouts are talented in special fields, such as entertainment, they might be sentenced to dead-end jobs throughout their lives with little opportunity for advancement. Wayward reformers believe that the best way to promote opportunities for disadvantaged people is to send them through more years of schooling and give them diplomas. Increasing the number of people with diplomas does more to help the children of the middle and upper classes retain their positions in society than it does to help lower class children to improve their status. Awarding high-paying jobs to people with diplomas is widely considered to be a fair reward for academic efforts, while withholding them from people without diplomas is considered a fair punishment for those who are thought to be deficient in characteristics necessary for success. The demand for high-paying jobs far exceeds the supply. If the number of people with college degrees increased by 20%, there is no reason to believe that the number of high-paying jobs in the economy would likewise increase by 20% or increase at all. In most fields, the number of plum jobs has been decreasing. Large companies have downsized, sometimes cutting hundreds or thousands of employees. Many functions previously performed by humans have been automated or are now being done with artificial intelligence. Corporate mergers have led to the consolidation of staff, and many manufacturing and service jobs have been outsourced to foreign countries. All of these factors have made the job market like a game of musical chairs. One sometimes hears the argument that the increase in diploma requirements by employers has been necessitated by the increasing complexity of jobs in America's high-tech economy. While some types of jobs require complex thinking, a great many have become less complex. Machines are doing more of the work, and many jobs have been substantially simplified. Employers usually prefer that workers not think much because processes requiring human decisions involve a greater chance for error than processes done by machines, especially in a country where more than 50% of adults have reading skills at a sixth grade level or below. Many employees complain about their inability to establish a sense of commitment to their work. Machines never harbor such feelings, and they are much more docile. They also never begin the workday hungover or preoccupied with family problems. Reforming the process of certifying the competence of people for employment should be done according to the following principles. The business and professional community should assume the responsibility for certifying people for jobs with external oversight to ensure that the processes are conducted in the public interest. Nobody who is competent should be denied employment because of a lack of educational credentials. The education system should be freed from the extremely expensive and wasteful bureaucracy that accompanies grades, required courses, degrees, and all other structures connected with certification. The biggest news event in the United States on March 8, 1971 was the boxing match between the undefeated heavyweight champion Joe Frazier and the undefeated former champion Muhammad Ali. Earlier on the day of Frazier v. Ali, the Supreme Court issued the Griggs v. Duke Power Company decision. The court ruled that Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited the Duke Power Company in North Carolina from using unnecessary education credentials to disqualify African Americans from consideration for jobs. Chief Justice Warren Burger, an appointee of Republican President Richard Nixon, wrote the unanimous decision. Sections of the decision have broad implications for possible reforms to the American education system and American society. The Duke Power Company required applicants to have a high school diploma to be eligible to work in certain departments. Before the requirement went into effect, white employees without high school diplomas had been hired, and they performed satisfactorily. The company required applicants for some departments to take 2 aptitude tests in addition to having a high school diploma. Applicants had to achieve scores on these tests near the national median for high school graduates, even though neither test was designed to measure the ability to perform a particular job or category of jobs. Chief Justice Burger wrote that the objective of Congress in enacting Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was to achieve equality of employment opportunity and remove barriers that in the past favored white employees. Under the Act, practices, procedures, or tests neutral on their face and even neutral in intent cannot be used if they operate to maintain prior discriminatory employment practices. Burger stressed that Congress did not intend Title VII to guarantee a job to every person regardless of qualifications. He also stressed that the Act does not command that people be hired because they were subject to past discrimination or because they are members of a minority group. He said that discriminatory preference for any group, minority or majority, is precisely and only what Congress has prohibited, and the law requires, quote, the removal of artificial, arbitrary, and unnecessary barriers to employment when the barriers operate invidiously to discriminate on the basis of racial or other impermissible classification, unquote. He added, quote, the Act prescribes not only overt discrimination, but also practices that are fair in form but discriminatory in operation. The touchstone is business necessity. If an employment practice which operates to exclude Negroes cannot be shown to be related to job performance, the practice is prohibited, unquote. The decision did not accuse the Duke Power Company of discriminatory intent. Berger cited the company's efforts to help uncredentialed employees by financing 2/3 the cost of their tuition for high school training. But he said that Congress directed the thrust of the Civil Rights Act to the consequences of employment practices, not simply the motivation. And more than that, quote, Congress has placed on the employer the burden of showing that any given requirement must have a manifest relationship to the employment in question, unquote. Two other sections of Berger's decision have special relevance with regard to certification reform. He said, quote, the facts of this case demonstrate the inadequacy of broad and general testing devices, as well as the infirmity of using diplomas or degrees as fixed measures of capability. History is filled with examples of men and women who rendered highly effective performance without the conventional badges of accomplishment in terms of certificates, diplomas, or degrees. Diplomas and tests are useful servants, but Congress has mandated the common sense proposition that they are not to become masters of reality, unquote. Berger concluded his decision with the following, quote, nothing in the Act precludes the use of testing or measuring procedures. Obviously, they are useful. What Congress has forbidden is giving these devices and mechanisms controlling force unless they are demonstrably a reasonable measure of job performance. Congress has not commanded that the less qualified be preferred over the better qualified simply because of minority origins. Far from disparaging job qualifications as such, Congress has made such qualifications the controlling factor, so that race, religion, nationality, and sex become irrelevant. What Congress has commanded is that any test must measure the person for the job and not the person in the abstract, unquote. For more than half a century since Chief Justice Berger wrote the Griggs decision, employers have been systematically violating federal law by discriminating on the basis of educational attainment, and there has been hardly a whimper of protest. If the government or any other entity suppresses a person's creative ability as embodied in a book, painting, musical composition, or other work of art, society calls this censorship and regards it as antithetical to the aims of a democracy. But when the government or other employer suppresses a person's creative ability as embodied in occupational competence, society is silent. There should be no job discrimination allowed against competent people who cannot afford to attend school or do not want to spend a long stretch of time in one. Nor should there be discrimination in favor of incompetent people with diplomas. In terms of economic efficiency, screening by level of educational attainment does not always work well. One of the first definitive studies of this subject is Ivar Berg's book, Education and Jobs, The Great Training Robbery. Berg examined the relationship between schooling and various characteristics of workers. While interviewing employers to learn about corporate personnel policies, he discovered that none of the companies he approached had considered educational attainment in studies of productivity, job satisfaction, absenteeism, turnover, grievance patterns, or any other dimension of work behavior. Employers merely assumed that better educated workers would be better for their organizations, showing more self-discipline and potential for promotion. This assumption was not supported by evidence that better educated people compare favorably with less educated ones who started at the same level of the organization. Better educated people in almost every job category tended to be younger than their peers, which suggested that they had started in higher positions when they joined the firm, and that any correlation between rank and schooling probably resulted from recruiting and assignment strategies rather than ability. Berg also discovered that better educated workers had higher turnover rates. Some companies acknowledged that the turnover of young executives varied only slightly, with an average loss of half of all college graduates within the first 5 years of employment. Many college graduates might expect challenging jobs with opportunities for rapid advancement, and if these conditions are not met, the graduates might look for work elsewhere. Berg claims that in looking at the overemphasis placed on schooling in the job market, corporations are not nearly as efficient as their stockholders might believe. He said, quote, "In general, managers spend considerable sums of money on worker surveys, personnel programs, sensitivity training for leaders, work benefits, and other efforts to improve employee morale. The relevant question, therefore, may well be whether these practices are not in large measure designed to undo the demoralizing effects of hiring policies that stress education," unquote. Berg compares educational discrimination to the folly of confusing a person's driver's license with a person's driving ability, and he raises a question for credential-conscious employers. In light of data showing few direct correlations between education and productivity, attendance, and loyalty, what is the justification for telling people without credentials that they need more education? Berg suggests that just because people with diplomas might be different from people without diplomas does not mean that school attendance was responsible for the difference. Many influences affect a diploma holder's life besides school, including home environment, religious beliefs, job experience, and outside interests, to name a few. Determining the extent to which each influence is responsible for the diploma holder's abilities is not possible. Successful people with diplomas might be just as successful if they had not been given favored treatment, and unsuccessful people without diplomas might be just as unsuccessful if they had not been discriminated against. However, some diploma holders might not fare as well in competition for jobs, while other people currently being held down for the lack of adequate credentials might become upwardly mobile. The concern about protecting social status is an important reason that educational discrimination has not become a major political issue. Middle and upper class people support the present system because it helps them to reserve desirable jobs for their children. Even with financial aid programs for indigent students, the education system still operates greatly to the advantage of people with money. Poor people have trouble coping with the expenses of prestigious private colleges whose degrees are deemed most valuable, and they might not be able to cope with the costs of public colleges. One reason the MAGA regime is attacking universities could be to appeal to people in the MAGA base who believe the higher education system is stacked against them and is responsible for their inability to be economically successful. As long as everyone technically has the opportunity to attend college, the American public does not condemn discrimination against individuals whose social backgrounds make them far less likely to succeed in the race for diplomas. The barriers not only restrict entry into jobs, but also hinder promotion possibilities. In the 21st century, unnecessary diploma barriers are disproportionately harming black people in precisely the way that Chief Justice Berger said is illegal in the Griggs decision, along with a lot of other people who lack credentials. The word certify comes from the Latin certus, meaning certain. The most important questions to ask with respect to job certification are: how certain can an employer be that an applicant is competent, and what yardsticks should be used to determine this? Creating meaningful competence tests for job applicants is difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. The test should be both valid and reliable. Validity means it measures what it is supposed to measure, while reliability reflects how accurately it measures a candidate's skills, passing competent people while screening out incompetent ones. Test developers must get input from people in the profession about what knowledge, skills, and abilities are needed for competent job performance. They then must decide what form of test to use. multiple choice, essay, oral questioning, or performance in the field. Sometimes a combination of testing methods is appropriate. The test developers must decide how many questions to ask and figure out what constitutes a passing performance. The questions must be edited for accuracy and clarity and must be regularly updated to reflect changes in practices in the field. The test should be graded rigorously, especially in jobs involving public safety and health, engineering, medicine, etc., because mistakes can have serious consequences. The tests should be readily accessible to anyone who wants to take them, and people should not be disqualified if they lack means. Businesses realize the expense and difficulty of creating and maintaining such examinations, so they have sought other ways to screen job applicants. Some job postings can elicit hundreds of applicants, especially now that people around the country and the world can learn online about openings. Employers do not want to spend the time and money to evaluate an enormous pile of applications or interview hundreds of job candidates. One way to keep the number of applicants at a reasonable level is to impose diploma requirements. These requirements might have nothing to do with job performance, but they are a convenient justification for reducing the number of applicants to a more manageable level. Many competent people thus might be unfairly disqualified from consideration, and the employer might end up with an overqualified, underpaid employee who will immediately start to look for another job that offers more challenge and a higher salary. Finding effective employees is not easy. The ability to perform well in a job might depend on an employee's experience, interest in the work, attention span, home life, social life, drug-using habits, growth potential, learning ability, health, decision-making ability, and other factors. An employer cannot assess these variables by looking at school credentials. A serious problem with any one of these characteristics could turn a highly credentialed person into an ineffective employee. Employers can only hope that there are no unpleasant surprises with respect to personal characteristics. Another important question is, what exactly does a diploma signify? It generally means that a person has received passing grades in all required courses and has paid the requisite amount of money to the school granting the diploma. A school can withhold diplomas if people have not paid up, even if they have passed all the courses. This leads back to the issue of validity, whether grades measure what they are supposed to measure and whether they reliably measure what one needs to know to do a job. Most schools seek to determine each student's intellectual value using letters A to F or numbers 0 to 100 as academic currency. Some use a simple pass-fail system. However, grades are as much a product of teacher characteristics as of student ability. People have been led to believe that teachers can tell the difference between a B and a B- paper, even though such distinctions are arbitrary. Grades mean different things to different teachers. Some teachers are sticklers for punctuation, grammar, spelling, and neatness. Others care mostly about content. Some teachers could mark the B and B- papers with an A and C, and the grades would have the same finality in the school's data bank. Many factors can influence the way a teacher grades a student's work, including fatigue, class size, and personal issues, such as whether the teacher had a headache or an argument with a spouse or partner. Grades can be affected by whether a teacher likes or dislikes the personality or classroom behavior of a student. The race and sex of a student can be factors that influence how well a teacher thinks certain students might be capable of learning. The physical appearance of students can be a factor, such as if a teacher feels attracted to or threatened by the appearance of a student. Grading systems contain too many uncontrolled variables to reliably measure student achievement. In higher education, grading standards differ among universities, among colleges in the same university, among departments in the same college, among courses in the same department, and among professors in the same course. In elementary and secondary education, grading standards differ among states, among jurisdictions within states, among schools within jurisdictions, and among classes within schools. At the elementary and secondary school levels, a response to the problems with grading standards has been to dramatically increase the use of standardized tests. The emphasis on standardized tests further narrows the educational offerings for students because schools are increasingly teaching to the tests, and the funding of schools might depend on how well the students score on the tests. Grades are very important for students who wish to apply to selective colleges and graduate schools. Entry into schools whose degrees carry the most prestige is extremely competitive. For Ivy League schools, the undergraduate acceptance rate is between 3 and 6%. Hence, there is a greater necessity for students to obtain high grades if they want any hope of being accepted. One bad semester, caused by illness or emotional problems, can ruin their chances. The American philosopher Robert Paul Wolff questions why grades are needed at all. In his book, The Ideal of a University, he said that learning requires the submission to the discipline of some standard. Because teachers usually are well versed in the standards of particular areas of study, they can help students to learn by criticizing their work. Criticism is usually thought of as a negative term, but it is not negative in this context. It should reflect a teacher's opinion, not the absolute merit of the work. It must not be confused with evaluation, because criticism is essential to the learning process, while evaluation is extraneous. A teacher grading a paper can show how some ideas could be stated more clearly, how the paper could have been better organized, mention ideas that could have been included or should not have been included, and correct spelling and grammar mistakes. Once a teacher has done this, no educational purpose is served by saying the paper is a B+ or an 86. Opposition to grades is not the same as support for a learning environment without structure and discipline. The main difference is the source of the structure and discipline. Grades can inhibit the development of close student-teacher relationships, which typically are important in the intellectual development of students. The psychologist Carl Rogers wrote in his book Freedom to Learn, quote, "It is almost impossible to be close to a student if one's primary relationship is that of judge and evaluator. In some instances, faculty members put the students in a real double-bind situation by giving them a contradictory message. It is as if the faculty member said, 'I welcome you to a warm and close relationship, and when you come close, I will clobber you with my evaluation.' The analogy to parents of schizophrenics is painfully clear." Unquote. The quest for grades induces students to think in terms of passing courses. Passing implies leaving something behind, such as passing a truck on a highway or passing a kidney stone. Students should study with the intent of having subjects stick with them. Fear of the consequences of making waves might cause students to complete their studies without questioning course content or other aspects of the academic environment. Some develop a distaste for subjects in which they receive poor marks, while others develop a distaste for all types of academic work. Sometimes students who receive high grades are targets of abuse from those who receive low grades, even though the real targets should be the schools that issue the grades. Among upper income groups, the emphasis on schooling as an investment has bred a disturbing sense of entitlement among many young people who feel that they deserve to go to a prestigious undergraduate college and possibly a prestigious graduate school, after which they deserve to be paid a six-figure salary for their first job. Overindulgent parents often contribute to these feelings of entitlement and do whatever is necessary to help their children reach the economic promised land. Sometimes students and parents will argue with and even sue teachers and professors over the grades given in a course because getting a B rather than an A might prevent a student from getting into an elite college or graduate program, which could affect future earnings. Before 1969, when the draft lottery system was instituted, young American men who turned 18 were eligible for the military draft. They could receive a deferment if they went to college and would lose their deferment if they either dropped out or flunked out. A student with a low grade point average might have had to study for a test or write a paper, knowing that the outcome might determine if he would be able to stay in school or be sent into combat in the Vietnam War. Professors and other college teachers were put in the position of knowing that certain students who received failing grades could be sent overseas where they could be killed or wounded. High school teachers were put in a similar position of knowing that if they gave low grades or poor recommendations, some students might not get into college and would be drafted to fight in the war. Students often are stuck with curricula lacking cohesiveness and meaning. In the 17th century, when the amount of available knowledge was much smaller than it is now, the idea of mastering a lot of it was reasonable. Now that the world is drowning in information, such an ideal is not possible, yet many schools still insist that students be exposed to a perfunctory smattering from a variety of disciplines. There is no evidence that studying subjects from different fields is more beneficial than studying one subject intensely. Students may achieve greater intellectual growth by pursuing a single interest in depth than if they have to spread themselves thin by taking a group of courses to satisfy requirements. When students have the desire and/or need to study a subject, they usually can learn about it much more quickly and easily than if they are required to study it. Required foreign language courses tend to be much less successful than if students try to learn the same language while living in a country where it is spoken. Likewise, much of the information necessary in certain fields of employment could be learned more quickly if people perceive the need to learn it and could see it being used in practice. Educational institutions should be encouraging students to think creatively so they can effectively participate as citizens in a democracy. Instead, students are being trained to be mindless conformists. Many brilliant and creative people throughout history either did not receive high grades in school or college, dropped out, or never went. The characteristics needed to achieve a high grade point average are often quite different from those needed to be creative. An uncreative person who is well organized and has a good memory might receive higher marks than a disorganized, forgetful genius. Some people have exceptional talents in certain fields and little talent in others. If they receive high grades in their talented areas and low grades in their weaker areas, their exceptional talents might be obscured if they are judged by the average of grades for all their subjects. Of course, there is no guarantee they will receive high grades in their areas of talent. Many of the people lionized in textbooks experimented and failed many times before finally producing a great work or making a brilliant discovery. Schools are not sympathetic to such experimentation, preferring to reward students who take few risks and can produce conventional work. To become an educated person, one must be willing to invest a large amount of oneself and one's energy in the learning process. Students are unlikely to make this investment if the subjects they study cannot arouse and hold their interest. Among college students who have no interest in going to graduate school, the ones who seem to best understand that certification has become more important than learning are those who obtain their diplomas while doing as little work and having as much fun as possible. There are college ratings about the best party schools, and the ratings influence some student decisions about which college to choose. If the Supreme Court decision prohibiting educational discrimination were enforced, the playing field for job applicants would become more level. People with the ability to perform jobs would not have to obtain diplomas from expensive schools before being given the opportunity to prove their skills, and they would not have to worry about whether getting a low grade in a course might destroy their career prospects. If people had easy access to resources from a library-like learning system, they could study much of the information they need to know about a job or profession without having to pay high tuition and go into debt. Combined with an expansion of internship and apprenticeship programs, young people could learn the basic information needed to perform a particular job or profession while seeing how the work is done in the field. This would provide important context for people in their studies. Those who perform well while learning in the field would have an advantage in getting a job if a prospective employer is pleased with their work. Many MBA programs are showing more interest in applicants who have had work experience rather than those coming directly out of an undergraduate program. Schools at all levels are worried about the increased use of artificial intelligence. Many teachers now check papers to try to determine whether they were written by a student or a machine. AI does certain things well, and it can be an extremely useful tool in medicine and other areas. One thing it does not yet do well is write papers. If schools were not responsible for grading and certifying students, AI would not be an issue. Students would have little incentive to hand in machine-written papers. They would be wasting their own time and their teachers. Some people try to exploit educational discrimination by buying credentials from diploma mills. As long as the American employment market screens applicants on the basis of diplomas, unscrupulous operators will be encouraged to provide diplomas for the payment of a fee rather than the completion of coursework. Some companies offer to sell various types of college diplomas for bachelor's, master's, MBA, and Ph.D. degrees. The customers know what they are buying, so they are complicit in the fraud rather than being fraud victims. Some schools that are not technically diploma mills serve the same function by giving diplomas to virtually any student who comes to take courses, realizing that standards that are too rigorous might result in a decrease in enrollment and revenues. Many well-known universities give out sham diplomas to football and basketball players and other athletes. Enforcing educational discrimination prohibitions would make sham diplomas irrelevant. Incompetent job applicants with phony diplomas no longer would have an advantage if they were unable to prove their competence to prospective employers. However, the legal prohibition would not eliminate educational discrimination, just as the Civil Rights Act has not eliminated racial discrimination. Educational discrimination is partly an attitudinal problem, and employers would still be likely to give preferential treatment to people who attend certain schools. Nonetheless, enforcing educational discrimination prohibitions would put the government on record as not condoning the practice, and it would force the business and professional communities to figure out relevant prerequisites for job applicants. There are many conflicting beliefs in the United States about diplomas and the people who possess them. The term college graduates tends to be positive, conveying the image of people who don a cap and gown to march in commencement exercises. But the synonymous term college alumni conveys an image of old and middle-aged people acting stupid at homecoming football games. The term frat boys conveys an image of young men from the movie Animal House spending most of their time drinking and chasing women before becoming alumni. For some political issues, people with degrees are respected when they provide expert analysis on news and talk shows. For other political issues, academic experts might be dismissed as having book knowledge but little practical understanding of the real world outside the ivory tower. There are many disparate ideas about the purpose of the bachelor's degree, which was first bestowed in the Middle Ages. It has since evolved from a hodgepodge of conflicting academic philosophies, and the requirements to earn one vary depending on the institution granting it. Many academics say that the bachelor's degree features breadth and depth, a certain number of courses in an area of concentration, and a lot of other courses that the student can choose either at random or within designated categories, such as the humanities, natural sciences, and social sciences. The breadth and depth curriculum became popular at Harvard University in the early 1900s when A. Lawrence Lowell was the president. He believed that, quote, every educated man should know a little of everything and something well, unquote. Yet a bachelor's diploma does not guarantee that its holder possesses the breadth and depth of knowledge needed to perform various jobs for which the degree is a prerequisite. The Doctor of Philosophy degree, or Ph.D., also has origins in the Middle Ages. To obtain one, a student is supposed to take a certain number of courses and then write a dissertation of book length representing a contribution to knowledge. The Ph.D. provides the certification necessary to obtain a tenured faculty position. At major universities, teachers without the degree will have limited opportunities for promotion. People who possess PhDs are supposed to be addressed as doctor, a word that comes from the Latin docere, which means to teach. Teaching was a primary role of medieval doctors. However, the curriculum for the modern PhD does not contain a component about how to teach. During the 19th century, American institutions of higher education shifted the emphasis of the PhD away from teaching in order to emulate prestigious German universities that stressed research. Ideas about teacher competence need to be broadened. There is ample evidence that people without a PhD can possess both the teaching ability and broad subject knowledge to be excellent college-level instructors. Among the factors determining teacher ability are personality, communication skills, and the ability to establish a rapport with students. These qualities tend to be innate and cannot be learned by taking courses. Unfortunately, the bureaucratic mentality dictates that if important criteria for employment cannot be quantified, quantifiable alternatives must be found, even if they are not relevant to the performance of the work. For employment decisions, school bureaucracies are not capable of quantifying personality and communication skills, so teachers are judged by the degrees they possess. Certification by schools is not the same as professional licensing, which is done by governments, although the two can be intertwined. For many professions, obtaining a license requires certification by a school. During the Middle Ages, medieval guilds sought to restrict the number of people entering their professions. Licensing and certification requirements now serve a similar purpose, restricting entry and influencing how much members of the profession are paid. No matter how much an innovation in a profession will benefit the public, members of the profession are likely to resist it if it threatens to drive down wages or prices, decrease the number of the profession's customers, or increase the influence of outside groups over the profession's activities. Professional groups generally justify diploma requirements as a means of protecting the public from incompetence, even though such barriers typically are erected by the professional groups themselves rather than at the instigation of the public. Many types of workers welcome diploma requirements so that their field will be considered a profession and the practitioners can call themselves professionals and put a stream of letters after their names. Higher status and salaries can be achieved if the body of information connected with the field is called a science and is taught in a university. The higher the university degree required before being able to enter the field, the greater the status attached. Systems of licensure should have public input. For instance, Ralph Nader has criticized bar examinations as being biased towards the legal rights of the powerful rather than the absence of rights and remedies for the weak. Members of the general public are not competent enough to correctly phrase questions on a bar examination, but they have an interest in what areas of the law such examinations emphasize. They also can provide meaningful input about the cost and availability of services, which are significantly affected by how many people are allowed to enter the profession. Employers are usually reluctant to spend a lot of money for on-the-job training because the investment will be lost if a trainee leaves. Through the school system, society now subsidizes the training and certification of workers for employers as a group, which benefits small businesses that are less able than large corporations to afford training programs. Schools would be unable to afford their current certification and training functions were they not so heavily subsidized by various levels of government. Both learners and taxpayers would be better served if governments reallocated a portion of the money being spent on schools to provide subsidies and tax incentives for businesses to develop and pay for training and certification. The current certification offered by schools is highly unreliable, and the training usually has to be relearned on the job anyway. Alternative systems of vocational and professional training have succeeded in America in the past. During World War II, many unskilled people were called upon to learn mechanical skills on short notice in military equipment factories, and they were able to perform their jobs well. After the war, many veterans were allowed to enter colleges even though they did not satisfy conventional entrance requirements, and there is little evidence that significant problems occurred. Many of the veterans were more focused and committed to learning than people who entered college directly from high school. The certification walls in American society need to be torn down both to create a fairer employment system and to benefit students who want to learn in a free and open environment. The term academic freedom currently applies mostly to the rights of scholars to freely express their opinions. It should be expanded to include the right of all people to freely choose what they want to learn without being restricted by the certification apparatus of current academic institutions. While freedom cannot survive without education, education cannot survive without freedom.